the other tab. And when I'm in the waiting room, then I basically get kicked out of the waiting room.
Oh, are you in the waiting room or are you?
No, it's just now it's just saying download and run.
Sammy, will you tell me when we're ready, or should I start?
Yes, I'll let you know as soon as we're ready.
Thank you.
All right, Leanne, we're ready whenever you're ready. Thanks for your patience.
All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order, our second budget committee meeting. Our first order of business is any follow-up questions based on the submitted questions that Olivia responded to and got us feedback for last week. Are there questions related to that feedback? Are there comments related to those questions? As a reminder to everybody, if you have a comment, you're welcome to use under the participants button. There is a raised hand, a little blue raised hand that you can raise if you have a comment. Jay, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I finally remembered where that dude was. I have some questions, and if this is related to material that we received, so I want to make sure it's in the right time, both from Peter and from Scott Newsham. Is this the right time for those? Is that what you're asking about now?
I think that I am asking about the submitted questions that we submitted as a committee to Olivia and her team over the course of a couple weeks, and then she supplied feedback. I don't know how this should go. Should we have any kind of discussion, or should we hold those new questions for after our public testimony? Anybody know? Anybody provide guidance?
So, Leanne, this is Olivia. Scott Newsham submitted testimony for tonight, and I believe that's the next item on the agenda after the follow-up on the Q&A.
Okay.
I'm happy to wait.
Okay, so Jay, let's hold your comments until after that. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Not hearing any other, we will move into staff and public comment. I am going to read from the script that I was given. First, maybe I should ask if anybody is in person to give comment. Yes, we have people. Okay, so then I will read. At this time, the committee would like to hear comments from the public. Due to the time constraints, public comment at this meeting will be limited to a maximum of 45 minutes. Public comment will also be heard at our next, public comment will also be heard, I'm sure, at the next meeting, but not at the next budget meeting. During public comment, we ask that you abide by the following rules. 1, when it's your turn to speak, please come forward, have a seat. I guess I don't know if these are really relevant now. State your name and direct your comments to the committee. You have 3 minutes to make your comments. We will indicate some kind of warning when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then let you know when the time is up. If a group wishes to speak, please designate one spokesperson for the group. If others have spoken before you about the same issue, please state that fact and either decline to comment or limit your remarks to points not already stated. If you are commenting in regards to a request for an increase or decrease to the budget expenditures included in the proposed budget, note that the budget presented tonight is balanced. It would be helpful if, in addition to a proposed increase, you also identify a corresponding decrease and vice versa. Okay, that is what I'm to read. And now maybe Jen, maybe you could help us tell us who is here to public comment.
Sure thing. Oh, sorry, Sammy. So you all received the bits of testimony that I sent you via email today. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 total documents that I sent you. There was one piece that you had received prior to last Thursday, or on last Thursday when we were supposed to be doing this meeting, from Scott Newsham. Scott Newsham also submitted a second piece of information that you should have received. And then there were other items that were listed. A couple of those folks are in the waiting room right now who would like to give verbal testimony to you as well. So I will turn this one over to, let's see, I have one piece of testimony or one individual on the line who did not provide me anything in writing, that just wanted to give you verbal testimony. So we'll have her do her thing first. And then the second one in the queue is John Stoll. So we'll have him wait for just a moment, and then I'm gonna let Clarice Amorium Fritat, Marine Fritas, thank you, Sammy, for helping me. I will let her in the room and she can provide her testimony. So hold on. Clarice, are you there? You should be able to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can. Okay.
Hi, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. If you could please state your name for the group, Clarice. I'm sure I didn't pronounce it properly.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Clarice Amorim Freitas. I can spell that if needed.
That's perfect. Thank you.
There's a little bit of feedback, kind of like a loop.
It's been
Oh, I
resolved.
don't hear it anymore, so maybe it's solved. All right, should I go ahead and get started?
Sure, you have 3 minutes and I'll be keeping time.
Perfect,
So go
thank
ahead.
you. Well, dear members of the Corvallis School Board, my name is Clarissa Morin Freitas, as I said, and although I do coordinate a local health equity coalition and I do work for a local community development organization, I'm here today primarily speaking for myself as someone who works and shops and gathers and partakes in Corvallis on a regular basis. Many of the folks that I work with and that I'm friends with are parents of children that do go to Corvallis schools, so I'm here on their behalf as well. I believe that Corvallis wants to be a good place to raise our children, and I really do believe that folks here want our schools to be safe and healthy and inclusive and diverse. But I also think a lot of other communities around the nation wanted those same things, and unfortunately, those communities were not and are not safe to Black and brown youth. Although the lack of safety might not always have risen to the level of physical violence or bodily harm, even when those things don't happen, there is still trauma that is inflicted on people and that remains with them when they grow up. The violence against Black and brown youth in our country is really deep and really pervasive, and it's ongoing, and a lot of it takes place inside schools. So I'm here not necessarily to share the stories that I've heard from friends and colleagues about the different traumas that they and their children have experienced. I'm sure some of those stories will come up from other testimony, and they're not mine to share. So I'm not here to do that, but I am here to ask the board to allocate as much money as you possibly can to the development and implementation of a strong bias response initiative in Corvallis. I am aware, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that our city council went above and beyond last night when they chose to allocate about $150,000 to this effort. And no, sadly, I really don't think that's going to be enough money for this effort to take deep roots and to spread really far and wide in our community. We do need the school district to be engaged in it, and not just with words, but with resources and funds to support it. I just keep wondering whether we want to be known as a community that is living and breathing racial equity and justice. And if the answer to that question is yes, then please consider allocating additional funding so that the bias initiative can be run in an effective way and that we can ensure that bias response to events inside and outside of our schools will be immediate and ongoing and will spare a lot of trauma and potentially even save a few lives, even in the broad scheme of things. Our children and our youth really deserve to be protected, and for that, we need money, not just words or thoughts or prayers. So I thank you for your time, and I hope you'll consider that request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 seconds to spare.
Great.
Thank you. Ah, cancel. Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, wait. Oh, she left. Father. Okay, so I just screwed up. So if Clarice is out there and she's listening and she wants to call back in so that if any committee member would like to ask her any questions, that would be great. And I will try not to kick anybody out prematurely next time. So do you guys have any questions for her?
Lou, I see your hand is raised.
She's not here though, so I don't know how to ask the question. Like, do I ask it anyways, or do I write it down in case she calls back in?
Perhaps you could share with us what the question is. Maybe others have that question as well, and then we could find a way to reach out to her and let her know that we would be curious to hear from her if she has the opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Jennifer is in the process now in calling her manually.
She's back.
She's back. So if you
Okay.
could hold on, Lou, for a second, as soon as she can hear us from the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Okay. She should be back and unmuted. I'm sorry, Clarice, this is Jennifer Schroeder and I kicked you out prematurely. This is all new to me,
It's
can you
okay.
tell, guys? Sorry
I
about
got a
that.
little confused as
So
well,
the
but
committee
it's
has a
okay.
few questions for you, and so you're allotted some time for that question and answer. So I'll let them do their thing and stop talking.
I have a question.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you.
So my question has to do with the amount you are you put forth, like requesting additional funds to the 150,000 that was requested for this position. I'm full and well understand the levels of bias that happen in this community, not only for myself but my children have experienced numerous, and so have they. But my question isn't about the position itself and the necessity of it. It's from my understanding from the city council meeting that they approved up to $150,000, but if other partners invest money, that is not going to increase funds for that position. It's going to decrease the amount that they committed to. Did I hear that wrong?
My suggestion would be, if possible, that the district allocates money, not necessarily to the position itself, but potentially to other supporting resources. There is a lot of training and a lot of other events and types of support that are going to be needed that go just beyond the position that will be running a program. I know from experience running a coalition that just having money to pay your staff to do their work sometimes isn't enough, and that staff sometimes needs resources to do other things as well. So my suggestion would be that the district allocated funds for supporting not the FTE of the position, but other resources the position might require.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, because of the way that it was approved and worded, it would depend on what was asked and if any funding was approved, how that would impact that funding that was already promised. So thank you for clarifying what you meant.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Other questions? Okay. Not hearing other questions or seeing other hands raised. We thank you, Clarice, and we will go to the next public testimony.
Okay, so I'm now admitting John Stoll to the meeting. Hold on while I unmute and fix his name. There we go.
Hi, John, welcome.
Thank you.
We are here to listen to your testimony, and you have 3 minutes. I'll keep track of the time, but when you're ready, start whenever you would like.
All right. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Stoll, resident of Corvallis, member of the King Legacy Advisory Board and the NAACP, and father of 2 children here in Corvallis. I'll start by acknowledging that I don't have familiarity with your budget. I haven't spent the countless hours that you've invested in balancing this budget. And so I recognize and acknowledge that we're a little late to the table. And, you know, we had initially focused a lot of our efforts on the city of Corvallis. And we're rather pleasantly surprised yesterday when we found that that allocation was going to be for the full amount. You know, to address your question, Lou, I would say my hope would be that the school board could come to the table with $50,000 along with the county. And then at that time, considering that the council has agreed to allocate up to $150,000, once kind of the decisions are made as to what this position description entails, those decisions can be made at a later date. But essentially what that proposal entails was money for both a bias response and equity coordinator, as well as dollars for diversity and social justice, community and equity development programming and training. I'm very aware of the issue that happened in our community, and I think it's very real that a lot of this happens in our schools, and for very good reason. And I don't necessarily blame our school administrators or our teachers or our school board. You know, you have a lot of diverse students coming from different backgrounds, and they bring to school what they hear and see at home, and that can make life very difficult and challenging. And you know, I think the reality is that a lot of times, a lot of what happens in the schools we don't hear. And it was just by happenstance that I became aware of an incident where my girls were going to school and a young boy was called the N-word. And I think they implemented what was their bullying protocol, which had this young child, thinking as if he did something wrong because it takes 2 people to create a conflict. And that conflict was completely fumbled from my perspective. And then I shared written testimony, hopefully that you received, particularly copied and pasted some content that Scott Emery had provided, detailing a really horrific incident that I believe happened off of campus. And so I think that's a good example of the necessity and the power that can come together when we have an intergovernment agency collaboration, hopefully between the school board, the county, and our Corvallis City Council, to really allocate the resources necessary to mitigate and address these problems. You know, I read the Superintendent Knox's statement, and it resonated with me in terms of trying to close the opportunity gap. And I think we need something like this in terms of the allocation of real dollars to help create a more inclusive and equitable community, both in the classroom and in our schools, as well as in our community. And so I thank you for this opportunity, and hope that you all might be able to move dollars together, recognizing that it is kind of the last minute to make this happen.
Thank you, John. Questions for John? Sammy, did I see a hand?
Yes, unless Lou has a question, I'll look for her first.
Are you sure?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, John. I have a couple questions for you, actually. One of them has to do with like the scope, thinking like how it was presented as a larger scope project and position initiative as a county-wide effort. Have you all approached the Philomath School District or Albany School District yet as well, or considered them for asking for funding, considering that there are also schools within those districts within the county? That's question one.
I have not. When I started this petition, so we created a change.org petition. At that time, and this was back in July, I had actually created a separate petition for Albany, and then decided to walk that back just because of the amount of time and difficulty that it was taking just trying to mobilize stakeholders in Corvallis. So unfortunately, no, I haven't approached or reached out to Philomath or Albany school districts.
Okay, thanks.
I
Yeah,
would, no,
oh.
so I'll stop there. You had another question?
Yeah, well, I asked that because if we're talking about intergovernment and interagency agreements, if there's other school districts within the areas that are being discussed, I think that's really important to think about as far as how those would be coordinated in those efforts, because how would we say like cut those districts out of the conversation? In other words, if we're trying to really address the bias in the larger community. So that was kind of where that question was coming from. Whereas like Corvallis School District doesn't oversee some of the schools that are in the county.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that question. And, you know, it was several months back, but I was actually a part of a conversation with the NAACP Superintendent Knott, and I think it was a principal from Philomath that was there. And I think that there's value in there probably even amongst the school districts. I think there was a broad takeaway that there was extreme value between those respective school districts sharing best practices. I know I was really pleasantly surprised that Philomath, out of all the schools, I think had it was something along the lines of when there was an incident that occurred, it was simple as there was a checkbox so that they could indicate that there was a bias incident that occurred. I could be mistaken, but from at least at that point in time, our Corvallis School District, and this goes in line with SB 577 and what our city of Corvallis has not up to this point done as well, is just collecting data. So if I were to ask you how many bias incidents are occurring in our Corvallis School District, I don't know that we have the data to present at this point in time. And I would argue that's because we haven't allocated the necessary resources and attention to these types of issues.
Great, thank you. And then the other question I had was if, like I understand the philosophy behind putting dollars to show support and the message that it sends to allocate funds to something. But I'm also wondering your thoughts around how to show support without necessarily, without a financial commitment, if you have thoughts around that, like if that's still considered supportive in a community sense. And the reason I'm asking that because if it was approved last night for the 150,000, it was clear with the other question, like there could be funds used for something else, but right now it's not clear exactly if the ask is for something else or for the actual initiative itself that was funded last night. So I think I would appreciate a little bit of clarity around like what are other ways support could look like.
I don't know. I'm not sure how other ways the school board or the school district could support this initiative. That's not to say that there aren't. I just haven't put much thought into that up to this point.
Okay, thank you. And the reason I asked that question is because I'm a really big proponent of community building, and sometimes when people want to build community, the easy answer is like, I'm going to give you some money to build that community, and it may not be an adequate amount of money without like the intentionality behind those dollars being built yet, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, you know, we started this effort really honing in on the city of Corvallis, quite frankly, because the school board, you all do have a DEI position, whereas the city of Corvallis doesn't. So I want to acknowledge that you're at least doing something, whereas from my perspective, the city of Corvallis had done very little to nothing. So you're ahead of the game, so to speak, from my perspective, at least. I would hope, you know, even in the case where an allocation is not possible at this point, I hope that's not the case, but that I do think that there's, tremendous value in having various stakeholders come to the table, that it's not just the City of Corvallis initiative, because I think there has to be a lot of communication that's occurring both in our schools and our cities. That one example, I think, of the Middle Eastern or student with Arab descent being a good example of this occurring off campus and what level, and I'm not privy to the level of communication that was occurring. I just know that it was only through happen chance that we were able to connect that family to care. And I think it was several weeks later in terms of getting them the community resources that they needed. I thought that that was a tremendous gap. And my sense is because there wasn't that strong sense of collaboration and communication that was occurring in the aftermath of that incident.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sammy, do you still have a question?
Yes, thank you, Leanna. I'll keep it very brief. John, thank you very much for your input and also for your leadership on this topic. And I listened to the City Council's meeting last night, and I really appreciate everyone's input and the City Council leadership on this subject. I will ask you a question that is actually relevant to tonight's work, which is budgets, investments, and related to the issues that you're trying to address. Of course, you talked about the measurements and finding out data, and that's part of the problem and the solution, understanding the incidents. But my question specifically is, when we apply this to the school system in a responsive and deliberate way in education, do you believe there's an overlap, or we would be addressing the objectives of the initiative if we invest in plans around every educator to engage in ongoing professional learning around cultural responsive teaching practices and being aware about anti-bias issues in our curriculum development and professional development? Do you think there's an overlap between the initiative and this goal?
I think it's a part of it, certainly, to provide the education and the training necessary. I'd like to think of that as a proactive approach that certainly is in line with the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here. I would hope that wouldn't be to answer your question, yes. I mean, I see kind of where you're going with it in terms of, yes, we're making these efforts in this area, and hopefully that should be enough. I guess I don't know if it is, because I look at it from the standpoint of, well, what happens when those incidents occur? Is there a policy? Is there an approach in place to make sure that additional harm doesn't occur? And I only have limited information. From my perspective, based on the little that I've heard, we don't have those protocols in place in our school district. And so I think it's a matter of who within our staff, who within our organization can develop those protocols. I'm imagining there's limited capacity. And so that's why I think a position, an effort like this would be really helpful. But to answer your question, yes, I do agree that is in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, John, and stay tuned during the
Yeah.
meeting. Thank you.
Other questions for John?
I had a question. I'm sorry, I didn't know if you could tell my hand was
No.
raised.
Yes, I saw your hand. Thank you. Yes.
I don't know if it's for John, but it's related to John's comments and testimony. But is there a way to do interagency agreements that don't require financial contributions? Like, is this something that the district can still partner with the city and county on?
I think. Or would you like John to talk to you about that? I'm not sure, Lou, do you think that this question's for John or for us?
I don't, if John knows, I don't know if it's for John or for somebody else to answer, but I wasn't sure how that worked. That's part of my newness and all of not knowing, like, can we still partner with the city and the county without the financial part, or are you excluded from those kind of projects if you don't invest financially?
Yeah, if you may allow me.
I mean, I don't know that answer. My hope would be that even, again, my ideal situation is, yes, you're able to make some monetary contribution to this effort. I would hope even in the case that you didn't, that a member of your staff would be at the table to help. Because I think in terms of developing what a position description looks like, right? I'm imagining that a stakeholder group of various community members, there might be NAACP representation on there, that there might be a school board representative on there to help facilitate and imagine what the scope of this work might entail. Without a monetary contribution, maybe that scope of work is more focused around the city of Corvallis, but perhaps somebody from the school board or from the school district could be a part of that process, I would hope.
Ryan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, in answering Lahui's question, the piece that I think is important is that this is a little different because it's a budget committee hearing than what we would typically experience, but there are times when organizations come forward asking for some level of partnership and collaboration, and typically what would happen is the board would have some level of deliberation, sort of like what's happening now, and then direct staff to engage with that entity and then come back either to go through a process of adopting that MOU or through a process of a report that identifies how that process is moving forward. And so it's clarity around involvement as well as process for reporting back to the board. And those are typically the steps that we undertake or the board undertakes with staff moving forward in a situation where there is some intergovernmental agreement.
Thank you.
Any other questions for John? All right, not seeing any. John, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Jen, do we have anyone else? No.
Jen says no.
Jen says no. All right, with that, let's move into committee discussion, questions, and requests for more information. And Jay, I think this is when you're up.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to both Scott, but more importantly to equally, maybe whatever, but equally to Peter and to Catherine and Margaret, because they were some really good inputs and questions that I think appreciate them thinking with us. So my comment or question regarding Scott's material, I just want to affirm where we are to make sure that his concerns have been addressed. And that is, he makes the statement that there is an inappropriated ending fund balance in our budget that's going to be 3.5%, but that in addition, we would have a 1.5% expected underspending to get to a policy target of 5%. And my questions are, is that a practice we've done in years past? And is it consistent with our present policy and with state law?
Hi, Jay, this is Olivia. I can take that question.
Thanks.
Yes, it's a practice that's consistent with what we have done in the past. I believe it aligns with our policy and that our goal is to end up with an unappropriated ending fund balance that is at least 5% of our operating revenues. And there's no state level regulation around this. This is purely all tied back to the board policy DA. So there are no requirements at the state level in terms of minimum ending fund balances that districts must have.
Okay, so can I do two more short questions just to be clear on it?
Mm-hmm.
So Scott raises a good question about our contingency and rainy day balances. And I think the conclusion is they're aimed at 7.5%. Isn't that consistent with our policy?
Yes, the policy actually calls out 3 specific different types of reserve funds. The policy requires an operating contingency, a rainy day fund, and an unappropriated ending fund balance. And so we budget the policy on operating contingency is 2.5% of operating revenues. The rainy day, the policy on rainy day is 5% of operating revenues, and for unappropriated ending fund balance, it's also 5%. So as a whole, the policy basically says that at the end of any given fiscal year, our ending fund balance should be at least 12.5% of our operating revenues.
I'm asking those questions because when I first got on, I did not understand how all those contingencies seem like they take money right out of our pocket. Why don't we spend it? Okay, so that I get it. My last question is the PERS set aside. And he raises a question that said, basically, he's concerned that we may no longer believe it. We need to smooth the PERS cost coming up in the coming years. Can you explain to me how our present proposed budget is anticipating any PERS reserve or concern?
Sure. So last year, on July 1 of 2019, we experienced a significant increase in our PERS employer contribution rates. We knew that was happening. We knew that was going to be coming. And so we had set aside funds to alleviate the impact of that big increase. The PERS rates they only change every 2 years. And so the rates aren't changing for the 2021 fiscal year. We know that. And we also know that the 21-23 PERS rates are going to be based on returns from calendar year 2019. And we also know that Senate Bill 1049, which was implemented last year, also is implementing some actions that are alleviating the PERS increases that were initially projected over the next several years. So we know that, 4 or 5 years down the road, we may be experiencing some increases if investment returns, are poor over the next couple of years. But in the short term future, we don't anticipate any significant impacts as a result of PERS rate increases. And so I don't think it's prudent for us to be setting aside that amount of funds at this point.
Thank you.
Other committee discussion, comments, questions? Sammy.
Thank you, Leanne. I just wanted to really comment and highlight really my appreciation for the community members talking about the incident bias initiative. There are lots of issues that we see here that in the community that needs to be addressed. And some of them are not categorized as hate crime or as flat out racial incident that is punishable by the law. But this is just like when someone is poked by the nail one time every minute, every hour, and expects to be poked every next minute, every next hour. Their life is just feels miserable, not because anything that they're doing or for who they are, but because of how the systems and the society has been constructed to disadvantage them for so many constructs. One of the most important ones is the racial aspect. And we've seen how that has been exacerbated in the recent days and months nationally into folks losing their lives because of these issues. So we need to be very mindful that these are issues that are important to measure and identify. And our schools are not immune from the need to systematically address bias, racial bias. So I really want to appreciate everyone who spoke about this in our community, in the city council last night, and also tonight. It's a work that's way overdue, and we need to work on it. Personally, I want to say I'm in favor of entering up interagency agreements. We want to be very mindful that as we move forward to such agreements, that the discussion happens across our corresponding boards, but also more importantly with staff, so the initiative can work. The rubber meets the road when our staff know how they can implement such systems. So we want to engage them in the conversation and have that change from the bottom up. But I'm definitely in support if my fellow board members agree to this, that we would bring it up in a future board meeting to explore the possibility of interagency agreements. So I see some thumbs up. Thank you so much, and I'll put that as a priority personally, and hopefully we can discuss this in more deliberation. Now, regarding budget, I want to highlight a couple of important issues here. I know there was an ask of $150,000, and community members asked each entity to invest into that. And here's what I want to say. I think we are in a process right now where it is not going to be beneficial to propose an investment unless it's been vetted and it's been explored thoroughly in terms of how we will spend those money. And we are already in a conversation where we want to say we want to prioritize our investments very strategically in the way that it works. That being said, I asked John about if providing staff with professional development focused on racial and culturally relevant instruction, because I thought this is something very important as a proactive work that's embed the incident bias response in a way that is mindful and in a way that's integrated in the classroom. We do have currently for that program and other programs investments up to $193,000 for the current year. That will continue for the next year. An extra new investment of $35,000, so totaling $228 just on that aspect. And today I just came from from a Zoom meeting, that was with the Regional Equity Network, which is includes 5 different counties, including Benson County and neighboring counties. And the discussion was, what are the most important things that we need to focus on in terms of helping our staff of color to be retained and to continue doing their work and to support our students' emotional learning and well-being, especially our students of color. And there were several ideas, and the top one was exactly the same idea, which is developing regional plans for every educator to engage in ongoing professional learning around culturally responsive teaching practices. And next idea, ESDs, which is educational service districts, to develop anti-bias interviewing processes for each district to adopt, including training for hiring committee members. So there is some conversation going on about systemic change, and those are investments either already in place in our current budgets and also ideas for that are regional that we're hoping that the state will be funding them through the regional networks that will support both districts and educational service districts. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Regional Equity Network since I'm only one member. And also we have a teacher, Ruben, one of our Garfield teachers, if I'm not mistaken, as a member in it. And we've been doing really good and mindful work, and hopefully we will hear more about it in the summer and next year, what are the amounts and how the programs will crystallize. I just wanted to highlight those to reassure our community members that the budget that the superintendent proposed puts this as a top priority, and that's what the board stated. Equity is a goal, and success in schools, whether it is health or educational success, should not be predicated or predetermined by any of the parameters of a student's identity, including race, gender identity, etc. And that's a utopia that we did not reach yet. We see disparities in the state, and we still see some disparities in our school district that needs to be addressed. And we see those challenges, the bias challenges that need to be addressed. So that aspirational goal has not been achieved, and we need to invest and continue to investing. My plea to our board members and committee members is to keep this as a priority and to support the objectives that we have, and to explore possible collaboration with regional school districts and also governmental entities moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sammy. I have Margaret next.
Sorry about that. You can hear me now. So I'm wondering about the timeline of it seems like we have two parallel budgets going on, sort of the uncut budget and then the more realistic budget. Is there still going to be opportunity for informal, not as a citizen budget committee member, but just as a community member, to be able to say, email Olivia or the district with suggestions, or again, I did have some follow-ups from my questions, but I don't think that it's worth taking time at the meeting here to do that. But how is that going to work, given that this is a year where the budget that we're supposed to be voting on is not really the budget that's going to be the budget?
So just a couple of things that kind of loop all back into that same concept. Focusing on the budget committee's role and sort of the spending plan that's being proposed. The budgets committee approval of the proposed budget would signify your confirmation that the district is planning to use its resources in furtherance of the district's vision, goals, and instructional priorities. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind as we think about the budget process, knowing that there are sort of these unknowns that still exist out there. I also would add that in terms of a timeline, we don't necessarily know when we will have a firm number from the state. The May forecast came out a couple of weeks ago. I know that happened after our first budget meeting, and we haven't met since then. Not to get into the weeds of all the numbers, but big picture, the revenue projection was obviously reflected a decline as expected, although it wasn't as significant as we had predicted. So that was a positive. The forecast indicated that the recession was probably going to last for 3 or 4 years. So that's something we're starting to think about now. And, you know, while the forecast is definitely a data point we're following, we expect that the numbers that came out of that will change as the result of a special session. The legislature has not convened yet in a special session. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen. And so the action that we anticipate will be during that time. We're still optimistic that we'll get a number in July. And once we have that, then we'll probably start working through all of the other components of our resources and starting to look at reserves, and whether it's state reserves or district reserves. So we still have a long way to go. And we're already implementing some plans now, putting in place for next year around just looking at departmental reductions. We've already implemented a hiring freeze. We've started offering some early retirement incentives to staff, and we're still doing some work analyzing our spending. So in terms of a timeline, I would say that I would expect that we'll have a number from the state in July sometime, and that it'll probably take us some time after that to sort of put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And so it's probably going to be closer to August before we actually know exactly, what our staffing is going to look like for next year and things like that. But with regard to the actual budget adjustments, that probably won't happen until November or December, which is our normal cycle for that, because we usually wait until all of our staffing work is complete in the fall. And then we also know the results of our property tax revenues, our local tax revenues. So we usually put together a supplemental budget if needed. It's historically been in December. So I imagine December is probably when the board could anticipate seeing a supplemental budget. And I don't see any reason why we would need to modify the budget prior to then, because the appropriations allow us to operate and implement and start a new school year. So I don't have it's kind of a vague answer, but that's kind of how I see this all playing out, because unfortunately, while the state number is helpful and that's going to happen in July, we won't know what our enrollment looks like until September or October. And we won't know what our property tax revenues are really going to look like until November. So we could do the work just using the state number and kind of rebalance the budget, but then it would probably need to be rebalanced again a couple months later.
Brian, did you have something to add on that topic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Olivia, I cannot hear anything you're saying. There's something wrong. It was like right when you started talking, I can't hear you. I think I'm going to need to restart my Zoom, and I'm very sorry. I wasn't sure how to deal with that. But I'm going to try restarting my Zoom and see if that works. If you just continue without me, I think at this point,
okay.
Anyway, sorry about that.
Maybe we'll come back to that topic. Peter, then Jay.
Can you hear me? Good. I kind of would like to wait for Margaret just because she's an important part of the committee. I don't think it's, I guess if everybody's willing, I'd be certainly willing to wait.
Sure.
There she is, and she's here.
Are you back, Margaret?
Need all of that. So I'm just gonna.
Can I yield back to Margaret and let her finish or catch up? Would that make sense?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I'm not really, I couldn't hear any of your answer. And so I really don't want you, unless you have like a 2-sentence summary or something, I don't want to make you have to repeat that all over again. I'm sorry about the Zoom problem.
No, it's okay. I think I can summarize it. So in terms of a timeline, I don't realistically think that the board will be entertaining a supplemental budget until the end of this calendar year, so that it incorporates any changes in enrollment and any changes in our property tax revenues. So it also allows for our staffing process to finish, and so we can capture savings as a result of attrition and things like that. So the state number I think we'll have in July, but I think there are still multiple components that will ultimately sort of lead to a budget reconciliation, but it probably won't be until December, which is typical for our district.
Okay.
Brian, do you have something to add to that?
I do. Just a couple of points. One, as we think about the actions of the board between now and November and December, could you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sammy couldn't, and he was sitting right next to me. So there are a couple of other actions that do take place. One is if we were to implement furlough days, that requires board action, which would be at a board meeting. Also looking at reserves, if there was the request to allocate reserves, from that would be a conversation that would happen with board as well. And so while it feels like this is sort of kind of like finality in terms of making adopting a budget, there's a lot of things that are going to take place throughout the summer and through the fall related to our current budget scenario. And at each of those decisions is a board meeting with action, with public comment and testimony. And we get testimony via public comment at the meeting, and we also get emails prior to that the board reads and responds to. So I don't feel like, I also want to just acknowledge that, because this is a different year based on the changes that are happening and when those changes are going to take place. But those steps are still taken through public meetings with public testimony. So I just wanted to add that to what Olivia shared.
Thank you.
Margaret, do you have other questions?
No, I do. Let's see. I need to raise my hand down.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure that you got your questions answered. Okay, Peter.
Can you hear me? Good. I just have a couple process questions I got real quickly. So we talked about in response to Margaret's question that as the year moves through, we typically get this additional information as we go. Isn't that pretty typical? Not just unique to this year.
Yes, I'd say that's very typical, because oftentimes our enrollment projection obviously is a projection, just like our property tax projections. So this year, with the state funding being an issue, I mean, there's more balls in the air than normal, but we always have a lot of assumptions built into the budget that we don't know until we're further into the year.
And can you give us some idea of what I know you didn't want to get into the weeds too deep, but I'd like to get a little bit deeper in the weeds, in the sense of how much better did the more recent information that you have been provided, how much better does that leave us with respect to the cuts that you expect? How much revenue, or how much revenue are you short relative to the budget that we've been provided with?
Well, if we don't assume any legislative change, which we do assume, and we don't assume any use of district reserves, which we may also assume, the state school fund reduction based on the May 20th forecast was a reduction of $489 million statewide, which is less than the original projection of a $654 million shortfall. So when Governor Brown had directed general fund reductions of 8.5%, the state school fund reduction based on the May 20th forecast looks closer to a 5.4% reduction to the state school fund.
What does that translate to your budget, to your revenue that you would expect?
Sure. For the state school fund, that translates to about $5.2 million less.
And you spoke about some in the other budget that you're working on. You spoke about some savings that you believe that you are realizing. Can you give us a value as to what that would be, ballpark value?
In terms of current year savings?
No, in terms of the relative to this budget and the various things that you ran through when Margaret couldn't hear, that could be potential savings in programs and with hiring freeze and so forth, the things that you mentioned.
So I don't have a number on the hiring freeze for you, and that number will change each time somebody resigns or chooses to retire. Same with the early retirement incentives. We just started offering that starting yesterday. The window for that closes sometime in June or July, I can't remember. And so that just depends on the number of people that take advantage of that opportunity. In terms of analyzing spending by function, that's just some work we're doing right now. We haven't taken any action to or directed any reductions as a result of that. We have asked each of our departments to look at reducing their budgets by 5%. So that action alone totals about $1.8 million. We're also looking at our budget for curriculum adoptions and our budget for major technology projects and asking those departments to look if there's opportunities for savings there as well. We don't have, in terms of like, there's another budget, like the notion that we're kind of, we have another budget. I don't have another budget. We just know that like, these are all things that are sort of in progress and we're working on attaching estimates to, but a lot of these things, we just don't have enough information yet. We're also looking at cost estimates relating to, you know, how our educational delivery models may look different next year. And so we've done a lot of work attaching dollar figures to different ideas and things, but in terms of like putting them together to say this is like the current plan B, we don't have that yet.
I understand. Do you have a total number that you are trying to hit in savings as you're working forward?
I wouldn't say so. I would say initially when we had communicated what our shortfall was expected to be next year, we were using a range of $5 to $9 million. I would say based on the May 20th forecast, the range shrunk a little bit, and I would say maybe $5 to $7 million at this point, but we don't have a specific number at this time.
Do you anticipate, how much would you be asking the board to, how much of your rainy day funds would you be asking the board to use or approve to make up the budget, or would you not be asking them to use the rainy day funds?
I don't think we'd be making any recommendations to the board on accessing rainy day funds until we have a number from the state in terms of state school funding.
Is it on the table?
I think anything and everything is on the table, but we know that it's a resource that's available, but we haven't formulated any, scenarios of what that would look like. It's hugely dependent on what happens at the state. We're looking mostly at the legislature allocating state level reserves. They may do so in a manner that ends up, having zero impact on the state school fund. And then our shift will focus to the student investment account and some other funds that may be at risk, but that's still too early to speculate on any sort of recommendations we'd be making to the board in terms of utilizing reserves.
I see.
Brian, do you have something to add? No, sorry.
Yes, I do. One of the things that, one of the reasons that that's difficult for us to answer is just as we get more information, it helps us to be better informed, as you know. But one of the pieces that was informative to us was looking at the long-term effect of this shutdown over the next two biennium. And so those sorts of pieces of information are really important to us as we structure how to move forward and what requests to make to the board. And I feel like we'll have additional information once the legislature reconvenes. And so I think those steps will be really important in helping us to determine what requests to make, because I think it will be more informed on the short-term and the long-term implications of the shutdown. And that's more information that we have today than when we met last as a budget committee.
I think that, I respect that answer, and it certainly is something that I was it feeds into how much of the reserves that you would be willing to spend in a particular year. It's important. If you think this is going to last 3-4 years, you may not want to spend all that money, of course, in the first year, just to balance out the cuts going forward. But I mean, what I really was hoping is that you had some better information between maybe the revenue projections weren't as bad, and you have some better sense as to what state reserves might be made available to the school district, so that you could make, without $5 million in cuts, maybe you would be down to $1 million in cuts or something like that. And you knew enough at this time that you could say our best, conservative information at this point is that, we're actually looking at something closer to 1 million. If you take reasonable assessments and use the best information that we have relative to all the different ways that you could mitigate this revenue shortfall. It doesn't sound like you're there, and I understand that and I respect it. I mean, it's just unfortunate, and sounds like it's a reality. I certainly wish that you had more information now. I wish that because the state doesn't have that information for you, that they could give you the permission to wait for that information to come along before you ask the school board to, and I mean the budget committee to approve something that is based on known information. So we don't know what the revenue is, and we don't know what your spending is going to be as a result. So we're kind of left with something short of approving a document where we can really figure out or comment on whether it meets up with your priorities. We just don't have the information. We can't do it. But that sounds like where we are, and I appreciate your information. I have one more question, just real quickly, is when we get a request, like we did just this late breaking request for additional funding, significant, in the sense of the fact that we're already in a budget shortfall, or when we're making these cuts, normally, I mean, the process was that, well, if you are going to make a request, no matter how worthy it is, you also have to suggest a cut to balance it out. I think I'd just like to turn that a little on its head and just say, I think, it sounds like that, and for that matter, all of the cuts that we need to make have to be balanced against our priorities, rather than just taken as here's another ask for $50,000. And so I guess my question is it really the person who is asking, or the entity who's asking's duty to measure that against your other priorities? How does it compare with some of your other programs? I guess is, how does it fit within your values? And it might be that $50,000 for that particular initiative is a number one priority for the school board, or a number two or number three, right up near the top, relative to some of the other spending that they're not familiar with. So they can't say, well, this ranks above in this particular time, this ranks above something like sustainability coordinator or something like that. I'm not calling that out. It just came to my head. So is that something that should be done with that ask? Should it go back to staff, and should they look at it relative to all the other spending and decide whether it really does rise up where that maybe takes precedence over something else?
I'm not sure who's best to talk. Maybe Ryan. I would say that it is a priority that it has already been outlined in the budget from my perspective, and from Sammy's comments. But maybe Ryan or Sammy could talk further.
Yeah, sorry, Leanne, I was paused because I had my hand up to respond to something Peter said earlier, and then I wanted to speak to that, and so then I was just kind of waiting. So, you know, as we work through all the details of these Zoom meetings. So the first one, going back to what you know, Peter just talked about, how again there is a lot of unknown, and his hope was that we would have clearer information at this point in time. I agree with him in that I wish I had clearer information at this time as well. What I did do, or actually Olivia did, based on my request, is looked at what other districts were what number of other districts were building their budget around. And we were not able to find any districts who did not use that $9 billion number to build their budget. So, and those that have been adopted are, you know, the list is broad, but it's, you know, Salem, Kaiser, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Bend, North Clackamas, Tiger, Tualatin, Lake Oswego, Lincoln County, Philomath, the ESD. So basically, while we're in a odd spot, all of our other districts around the state are in that same situation, and they've all gone with that $9 billion figure. And so I mention it just because I know that it causes some angst to be in this situation for all of you. And I want you to have a sense of where everyone else is at the same time. So if nothing else, it's a comparator for you to be able to say and understand that that's where every other district in the state is at with that. And then in answering your question about the request that came in, I appreciated the way Sammy answered it, in that he took it and said it fits within one of those 5 board goals areas, our goal around equitable systems, and these are investments we're making here. These are the things that we're doing right now. Does that align with what you're hoping we will be able to achieve in this effort? Or would you feel like you want to achieve in this effort? And so I appreciated the way that response, because I think it shows where that alignment happens. And it also narrows the field of all the things that a district is doing to these are the priorities in this around this board goal. And these are the things that we think are important in that board goal. And these are the things we're working on. Does it take more priority or precedent related to that specific area rather than more broad terms? So that helped me to sort of focus on a little bit more as I was thinking about the budget and the things that are happening for next year.
Yeah, and probably I would, thanks Ryan, and I would just add on that the way that this is reflected in our document, if you would see page 4 and 5, they lay out the process of how the sausage is made per se, for how the budget, how we spend our money and how we decide what's worthy of investments of money and what's needs to be reduced if we want to reduce our cost. So pages 4 and 5 really speaks really well to it. And I've been skimming through the yellow book, which has been an assignment for us to read, Smarter Budgets, Smarter Schools, How to Thrive and Survive and Thrive, how to survive and thrive in tight times. And it's really that lay out the process that staff has been following in these 2 pages. And and of course in pages 27 through a few pages afterwards, 26 through a few pages afterwards, we talked about how our priorities align up with our goals, and staff highlights that we had this conversation of school board goals. We talked about the continuous improvement plans and instructional priorities, and this is how it translates to the new investments. So that's one way where we see the transparency of translating goals and data, where we see gaps all the way to programs and investments in the budget. Probably one thing to also add as a perspective of what you're talking about, in the ideal world, and probably this is how it works in the last 6 cycles, budget cycle I've been in, and maybe Vince can add, our other board members who's been here more than me and Vince as well, could talk to this. Even though the buck stops here in terms of budget committee and board, we could say, take $50 from here and put $50 there. It never happened that way because that authority is very, very dangerous. And we see it happens in Congress all the time, but we want to be very mindful that when we develop a budget, it needs to be approved by the board and then implemented by our school district staff. And they need to have that conversation, how this money expenditure will work and will actualize. So one mechanism is really adding money and subtracting money to balance the budgets during a board meeting, during a budget meeting, like the one that we're in. But mostly those decisions happen on the building level and district level as Ryan develops the budget throughout the process laid out in pages 4 and 5. So I hope that adds a little bit of perspective where those programmatic decisions are made and how they can happen all the way from the beginning of the year until now.
Can I just ask one more follow-up? Does the cuts that are coming, that we believe are coming, I guess, or may be coming, are they going to be done this exact same way, or are we just going to focus on priorities of have we changed priorities to protecting staff and the workforce and maintaining school days? And how do those translate? I can see how I understand the argument that they can be one and the same, but the details are missing from the budget committee as to how they are the same. Can you fill in any of that detail?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to note that, we went through a pretty extensive process to develop a multi-year strategic financial plan that outlines instructional priorities that align with the board goals. And then within that, a lot of strategic investments that are part of each of those instructional priorities. And so in times of budget reduction, it doesn't mean, it's not like a, last in, first out type of situation. So when we look at budget reductions, we're not going to be doing any sort of categorization or ranking based on, the last things that were added. And obviously, when we have a structured set of goals and priorities and investments, we're not going to just eliminate those, especially because we've done so much work to track the feedback from those so that we can see whether they're working or not. So we kind of make a commitment when we implement an investment that we give it at least 2 or 3 years before we even evaluate its effectiveness. It's kind of going back to the conversation about the request that was made earlier today, how if we're going to invest in something, we kind of need to have a good plan in place before we actually make that investment so that we know kind of what to expect and how we can measure whether or not we're getting the results we expected. So it's the same in this situation. Any types of reductions that are happening sooner rather than later would all be, outside of the classroom. They wouldn't be things that tie back to these board goals or the instructional priorities. And so I think as we get further, if we need to go further, we don't know yet, we have to sort of weigh those things. But we made a commitment pretty early on that in order to pay for our priorities, there would need to be trade-offs. And that's part of that smarter school spending work, is really diving in to identify the trade-offs that can be made so that we can maintain the strategic investments. And those are some of the conversations we're just starting to have beyond our extended exec team and with our district leadership team, starting to get feedback in that area.
Thank you.
Jay.
A couple of comments that the board work on bias. I am absolutely, struck by the need to help in this area. But I think Sammy's summary of things we've done, I would add, the board took on a policy that expanded the definition, check me on my word, but harassment and hazing and so on, so that we stretched ourselves out into the community to try to bring episodes of bias into that assistant principal or dean of students or discipline's office. So that would be an example of we've already spent it or have thought about it, and it won't require a $50,000 chunk right now, but we need to do what I heard the gentleman that testified, we need to do some good testing of metrics. The simple notion of making a check mark and cataloging how many bias incidents that now are we taking care of, that's a big deal. So I appreciate that. I just want to make that comment. My concern goes back to something you just said though, Olivia, and it's a little sneaky on the part of, it catches us in budget world. If you talk about one of the ways that we may have to address this is you implementing a hiring freeze and offering early retirement. Let's assume that there's a math teacher that says, I'm ready to leave. And that cost could then generate, I think your figure was $40,000 or $50,000 to the budget by hiring a less senior teacher. I think I just added the word hiring a less senior teacher under a hiring freeze statement. So are you able to tell us that we absolutely won't replace the early retirements, or what would be the plan? And I think that gets back to one of Peter's and Margaret's comments is, are we clear on what the impact of all these options might be?
I can start, but I think Ryan can probably elaborate more than I can. The early retirement incentive is about creating spots for placement of staff. So there are areas of the budget that we may reduce, but a math teacher is probably not going to be one of those, right? So we may have staff that need placement that might be able to be placed in a vacant position rather than us hiring, bringing new people on, and then still needing to find placement for other staff. So it's complex, and I know that maybe Ryan can explain it a little bit better than that, but I think it's not so much about replacing more expensive staff with less expensive staff. It's about creating placements to put people that might be displaced because a certain position was reduced.
I'd make a quick comment would be, if one of our big values was class size and quality of education, if you're saying that there's another math person somewhere else in the district that would get placed into that old position, what's the net impact on the second person's math position? In other words, it sounds good, except that's where we ask you guys to do the heavy duty analysis. Are we staying consistent with our values, or are we shuffling chairs? And that's a concern.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think it is looking at placements. You may, and sometimes it's that I haven't taught math for a little while, but I have the endorsement and I can go back to teaching math rather than looking elsewhere for a position. So those sorts of scenarios play out as we go through that process. And also the other piece is that there are some positions that we will still need to fill. Right now, a hiring freeze sounds like zero sum, but at the same time, there are positions that are highly required positions that we can't not fill. And so basically what we're doing at this point is looking at what are those hard to fill positions and making individual decisions based on that position, based on the scenario, rather than everything that we posted for the spring we're filling. That's not what we're doing anymore. We're becoming way more discreet and specific in what we're doing in that regard. And at the same time, we know that as staff and employees retire, they leave with a ton of skill into retirement. And so we lose that. At the same time, we're able to retain staff members that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so those are all aspects of what Jennifer and her team work on as these situations come up. In fact, she has some open house sessions this week for employees who have specific questions about their role, their position, their FTE to get questions answered, because we also know that these conversations make people nervous about what next school year looks like for me. And so we're also cautious about how we speak about these things, because we know that it's employees in our system that we know are of high quality, and we don't like to even have these conversations to begin with. But that's the reality right now, and we have to be open and candid, but at the same time, we don't want everybody to be scared.
My last comment would be, Olivia, could you tell us what impact, if any, on spending happens if we delay these decisions or looking at another budget? Are we committing ourselves for, I guess, for the first 4 or 5 months of our budget to some spending that we would rather not do it? Or does that make sense? In other words, delaying the next level of decisions, are we committing ourselves to some things that we would rather not? Or how do you, is that just weighing that against, yeah, but we'd rather have some flexibility?
I'd say that there's the types of spending that we experience in the months of July and August is all tied back to department spending mostly. And that's the kind of stuff that's already sort of in process for review. And so, when it comes to our budget, we know that we spend the majority of our operating funds on salaries and benefits and our payroll. And so our large payrolls don't start until the month of September, because the majority of our staff don't come back to work until the end of August or early September. So the majority of our budget is controllable through a late, after the first 2 months of the fiscal year. For things like, I'll just give some examples, like our facilities and maintenance department, maybe they decide to defer a repair or a maintenance project that they had planned to do this summer. That's the kinds of things that they're already sort of thinking about. And so those are the types of things that we would be able to control more during the first couple of months. And then by the time, our staff start to report to work, I think we'll have a better idea of, what our funding will be. We anticipate we'll know that in July. So we'll still have time to make changes if we need to. So I think that answers your question. I see
Yes,
you
it does.
nodding.
Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
what I'm saying. Thank you.
Margaret.
Maintaining a strong workforce, then sort of that implies to me like staff at the center. And the school board has been putting students at the center. And I completely understand that there's some overlap. And I certainly, hope you can keep as many of the teachers and staff on as possible. And I can see that, when you say strong workforce is a top priority, that would be reassuring to the staff that works there. But I think that that's sort of a problem when you think about what you're messaging out to the community. Because if you think, the job of the district, the first job is to educate students more than it is to create jobs. And so to me, that just sounds a little bit off. I can still see that you could come up with a really good budget if you're trying to, one of your big goals is to maintain a good staff workforce, but it seems to have a little bit of a conflict with the students at the center versus staff at the center, and also just the messaging that you lose the fact that the job of the district the first job is to educate students.
So I hear that. One of the things that in terms of the language about a strong workforce, it's not, my terminology wasn't a large workforce. It was about strength in the folks that we have, and the fact that we having strong staff leads to strong results for kids and for students, and having days of school also leads to more experiences for students with those staff members. And so I hear that where your concern lies, and at the same time, I wasn't trying to put one group above staff above students. And so I hear that, but that's where we know that strong teachers, strong staff leads to greater student achievement. And so I'm trying to think about how do we make sure that kids have experiences in schools, have a strong group of adults that help them to grow and thrive. And so those two things, as I think about the board goals, I see a lot of connection between those two things and board goals, because again, student achievement has a lot to do with instructional time and the quality of the teachers and the staff who are working with kids. Equitable systems is about developing a strong workforce that is racially diverse and can teach with cultural relevance. Real world learning also takes somebody with skill to be able to bring authentic learning to our kids. Health and wellness requires us to have the investments that we've made around our nursing staff and around our counselors and therapists. So I see the connection between that language and what we're trying to achieve for kids. It's good feedback for me as I think about the language that I'm using right now in these times.
Thank you.
Lou. Lou, I think you're on mute.
Thanks. I thought I pressed it. It was the wrong button. This first point is just related to the last bit of conversation that we just had about priorities, and it's sounding like prioritizing employment. Maybe if we reframe how we think about it, instead of saying like we're securing jobs, it's like securing the teachers for our kids, sort of like what you were just saying, Ryan, like as far as like keeping qualified people, but like I think that changes how we think about things. It's not looked at as a job. We're wanting to keep teachers, counselors, support staff employed. Yeah, but that doesn't mean the same thing as like we're just trying to retain it for the sake of employment. It's for the kids in the district. And a lot of the kids have really specific needs that are supported by specialized positions too. And so anyways, I just wanted to share a slight reframe of how we talk about that. And then the other part has to do with the conversation earlier about how we've already invested in some things that may help with the bias and the bias reporting. But I don't want us to think that we have done the best job in that, because I do not think we have. And so I don't want us to think like, oh, because we have this statement or we have this commitment that we have a lot of work to do. I felt like I needed to say that, because I don't want us to be off the hook and say like we don't need to play a part. And even if we don't have a financial ability at this exact moment, I'm not sure where we're at with that, but it's something I think that's that we do need to prioritize in coming years if it doesn't happen this year financially.
Thank you. I had a question in relation to some of the testimony we received last week, I would say, and to the follow-up questions. Obviously, we don't know what the budget will look like, but it sounds like Ryan has put in place 7 different teams related to our response to COVID and a variety of other issues. Ryan, I was hoping maybe you could inform, possibly I'm the only one that is not in the loop on this, but about those teams, and just remind me what all those teams are doing.
Sure. And so those teams started meeting this week, and the design is really thinking about sort of a crisis or emergency response sort of process, and what are the key what's the key framework for us to build from. And so the groups that are meeting are health and safety, and they're talking about everything from incorporating the perspective of our nurses to what do we think about next year if we were to have a student who had COVID, and what does that mean for the kids in that classroom and the students in that school? What other safety measures do we need to put into place and are in place before students return? So families feel confident and comfortable sending their students to school, as well as what are their contingency plans if we have a situation where a student becomes ill. Budget and finance, those are the conversations we've been having for the last hour, just about what are things, where are we right now financially? What are some unintended costs that we may take on as we think about the guidance that's going to be coming to us from the Department of Ed. I expect new guidance to come to us the beginning of next week. We sent out a survey to families last week and had over 2,000 responses to the survey, asking questions about what would that educational design look like, and what's your feedback around that. So there's a group around who's looking at educational delivery, and they're looking at that survey. They're looking at the guidance we have thus far and what we should anticipate for the fall. There's a group focused on workforce, and that group is talking about the conversation we just had about potential layoffs, as well as hard to fill positions. And that's primarily our human resources department and our association presidents that are meeting in that area. A group that's focusing on equity, that is including parents and students as well. That in each of our committees, there's also a person who has a focus on the equity lens in decision making and is asking questions that we need to be thinking about as we're developing a system for next year. Summer programming, we have guidance from ODE that's really restrictive, but what summer program are we going to offer? And working pretty closely with the foundation around that. Operations, which has a real key connection with health and safety, but everything from student transportation. What does it mean if we have to have 3 feet between each student riding the bus for next school year, to what are other safety measures that we need to put into place within the school? Do we need to think about some of that that plastic work like you see at the grocery stores now in front of our registrars and office managers when people come into the office? Those kinds of conversations. How do we make sure that we have the supplies that we need? And then a group that's focusing on social, emotional, mental health. So again, thinking about if our commitment in this model is care and connection and student learning, how do we make sure that we're able to maintain that care and connection? Because we do anticipate that there will be changes next school year. The way the school year looks at one point in time may not be the same way it looks 4 months down the road. And so we need to make sure that we're also supporting our students through those transitions, and our families as well, for that matter. So those groups are currently meeting, and they each have a lead who is a district office coordinator or director, and also has teachers on it, has some classified staff on it, have some principals on it, because we are working to develop a strong, solid plan for next school year. Was that the level of detail?
Excellent. That's
okay.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Other comments or questions? Lou?
This one isn't about like the technical details, so I wanted to make sure like I didn't want to detract from that conversation if people had other questions. Or should I just go?
You're it for right now, so go ahead.
Okay. Mine was more a point of concern about the way that public comments were solicited for the budget meetings, especially this last one. I asked about it at the last meeting if it was going to be on the district page, and it wasn't really on there very well. I think about all the steps that you have to take to get to find the information on how to provide public comment. And if it's somebody's first time, they're not going to know to look on the agenda or even to click on what the packet is, and it goes to another web page. And so, for example, the first notice of budget committee meeting that came out a little bit late as it was for the call for comments. but it has like the link to the YouTube channel, and it has like, here's who you email your testimony or comments to, or how you mail it. Here's the deadline, time, and date. That didn't happen for this meeting, and that's kind of concerning to me. There was just a notice of reschedule. And also, if somebody isn't clear on how the budget process works, and they're just starting to be involved with it, on that on the notice of the budget meeting for the meeting on the 14th, it has the information about with respect to social distancing recommendation, the budget committee will only accept written comment or testimony for the May 14th meeting, because there wasn't it wasn't clear that how the directions work or information on how people can submit their testimonies and the deadlines for tonight's meeting. It could have been read that that was the only meeting that they could provide comment to. And so I just wanted to bring that up as a point of concern, and something that I feel like we really need to do a better job of for next year's budget, since we're already at the point where we're past taking public comments and everything. And I felt it was important to point out that I personally feel like we kind of failed the community in that regard.
Thanks, we took notes on that.
Thank you.
Jay.
I wanted to second what Louis said, and Margaret gave us a hint towards, remind me, it's maybe Lake Oswego or Beaverton School District had a process. So maybe that's a informational kind of meeting in September that the board might look at some early takes at suggested options, because I agree. I know that input from the public can be challenging and sometimes not always appropriate and sometimes off task, but for the most part, I think we get good thoughts, and I want to encourage it. And then that my second comment follows up in that same vein, which is I would be very hesitant to support a budget tonight unless this group commits, the board commits to a process that we would have a pretty expansive look at an adjustment process in October, November. I know we're all good-hearted people, and Olivia and Ryan and the whole staff do a great job, but I think process-wise, we're coming up short if we're facing some major cuts and do not let the public have a look at it in an important way. And I know we talked about last time the difference between a superintendent's committee and a board committee and what's lawful or whatever, but I need a statement from the board that says we're committed to a pretty big look by the public, more than maybe just board comments at a supplemental budget meeting down the road. So
Vince, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the board has the capacity to hold a hearing on any topic it chooses, and including public input on adjustments in appropriation to align with available resources. Input for such a hearing could come through the usual channels. A person can testify in public, or they can email the board. But to your point, Jay, I personally commit to bringing such a motion before the board after the upcoming legislative session. And staffing for the fall is set, and there's more certainty around the fiscal position in the school district.
And assuring the members of the current committee that they would be welcome to be a part of being there and giving their input, just like they are right now. So thank you.
So we can get into the details of that later, but that would need to be something that I think would have to happen in July, because that's when we're having to make decisions for next school year. So I heard the dates Jay threw out, and I don't know that that's going to be. So again, we can work on it later, but I just think that we have to be clear, at least with this group, that those kinds of conversations are happening this summer.
Peter.
I guess I would just like to express my appreciation and support to Jay for that thought. And I'm wondering if there's a process where we can provide a contingent approval not a final approval for a budget, because I frankly don't feel like the policy has your fiscal policies that are really solid and I really like. I do not feel like we've lived up to them. I don't think we have a best case. I mean, a conservative, most best available information revenue number. And I don't think we know where the cuts are going to go relative to the financial plan. And both those plans, those are great plans. And from my standpoint, I guess I just can't get on board with everyone else is doing it this way. Why not us? To me, we have good policies and it's a time of crisis, and the time to stick with your policies and your plans is in crisis. That's not when you walk away from them. That's when you use them because they're good guideposts for us to end up consistent with the values that you've worked on, up to this point. So to me, it would really take something like that, a contingent approval or even a delay until we can get the information that you don't have to approve a budget that we don't know about. So that would be very helpful to me. Thank you.
Sure. To answer the part about contingent approval, it's not something that's outlined in statute in terms of the budget approval process. So the board we are required to adopt a budget by June 30th. The board adopts the budget committee approves the budget. So the budget committee can't take any action on a contingent approval because then the board wouldn't be able to take in and have a hearing on the approved budget and all the things that are required legally. In regarding the assumptions that we use to develop the budget, in alignment with our policy and parameters, the revenue assumptions we use to develop the budget are based on the best information we have at this time and verified with documentation, which is outlined in our parameter. The state school fund estimate that ODE published in February of 2020 is on page 219 of the proposed budget document. The reason why all the districts around the state are using the $9.0 billion state school fund allocation is because that's the official estimate that ODE has released to all school districts, and ODE has made it really clear that they're not going to be updating that estimate until any legislative action is complete. I would say that I totally understand the uncomfortableness with it. And I think for a budget committee conversation, I think we're open to any sort of proposed amendment in terms of what number you think we should be using. If you want to propose a number you think we should be using and the basis for that number, and the offsets for that, I think we're always open to that. But I think that's the issue, is that nobody has that number. And I think that there would equally be a lot of uncomfortableness with whatever that number would be at the same time. So I think I totally hear you, and it is it's just one of those situations where we don't know what we don't know, and unfortunately this is the situation we're in. It's not unusual, and I would highlight all of the other components of our budget includes a lot of assumptions that we won't know until a later date. And so there are a lot of moving parts, but the fact that we don't know everything when we adopt our budget is not a new concept for us.
I would agree with that. I've been on this committee a really long time, and we have always had situations of things we didn't know, and a lot of things, like every single one of our staffing groups we have no contracts with, so we have no idea how much those are going to cost us or anything. So it is, I feel like this budget is as good as we can hope to adopt by the end of June, knowing that the budget is going to change like the budget changes every year. Vince, I think you had a comment maybe related to this topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the committee that in addition to the statutory requirement for the adoption of a budget on June 30th, we also have to submit certified millage rates to the county assessor by July 15th. So, and that is tied to this process.
Jay, did you have an additional comment? Okay. Other comments before we might entertain a motion? Vince.
Yeah, I think this is the point, since we're kind of drawing to the end. I just wanted to express my appreciation for the conversation that's unfolded over the past two meetings, but really for the work of the superintendent, the finance director, and the rest of the finance staff in bringing forward this inspiring budget document that is well aligned to board and district goals, all in the midst in responding to a global pandemic and planning on how to mitigate the impacts to staffing, school days, and programming. It's akin to juggling, walking, chewing gum, all while being quarantined. Once again, I find myself thankful for being able to live and serve in Corvallis and have my children attend the school district. And I look forward to working with the district going forward as we work through this. So thank you a lot, all of you, and to district staff.
Other comments, questions, concerns? Sammy.
Thank you, Leanne. I want to read a statement, short statement that I think is relevant to this budget. And it summarizes where we are in this time of the year and this time of the pandemic. If you take care of your educators, they will help you take care of your students. This is what I hear from this budget. I think this is there is a parallel to it in the private industry. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of your clients and customers. And our kids come first, but there's no way we can care about them unless we show our commitments for our staff and educators, that we care about them and we want to support them, that they can support our students. And I've been hearing that as a culture of our district and as a language within the numbers of our budget. So thank you for our district staff for prioritizing our children and their educators. This budget puts our students' success, wellness, and safety first. The Corvallis School District is fiscally conservative with a board policy that informs the responsible stewardship of taxpayer money. And this budget is not a luxury statement. It is a statement of needs and values that our community live by. There is much more that needs to be done, specifically when we think about the disparities in student success and outcomes and health outcomes. Those disparities are not acceptable in a public education institution that is committed to equity and justice. And that's why we want to spend our investments strategically to make sure those disparities don't continue to happen, and definitely not to be exacerbated during a pandemic. So thank you for our staff to putting our students first and equity first. This budget realizes that there is more work to be done. And I want to particularly highlight how the budget investments are aligned with the board goals, specifically the $4 million highlighted in pages 26 and 27 that we continue to commit to for the next year, an extra $173,000 that are speaking specifically to a high importance and high urgency of programs that we need to focus on. So I really appreciate that work. They speak to equity and health and wellness, and I see them as a statement of needs of what we want, what we need to do. And now, assuming we pass this budget, and I am in support of passing this budget, but with a very, very keen eye on what's going on with Salem and Washington, D.C. So this is the time we need to advocate for our schools with state and federal governments. On behalf of myself, and I would encourage my colleagues on the committee and the board, that we can communicate with our federal representatives and also with our state legislator to really commit to our public education. Public schools are no more just instruction. They are instruction, there are access to services, access to success. They are the cornerstone of our democracy. They are cornerstone of the success of our community. And we want to continue this commitment. So we want to make sure that as we navigate through this pandemic, the investments that we want to put in our schools are maintained. So I hope that community members who are listening to join us in this and make sure that we speak very loud and clear that education investments are paramount to get out of this crisis, which is a health crisis that can exacerbate our students' future if we don't really pay attention to their needs today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sammy. Jay.
I'm going to be supporting the proposed budget, but with Peter and Margaret and Catherine, especially in my mind, part of my history with schools and school budgets was as a high school principal fighting like crazy for every dollar. And in times of very, very hard times, it was so frustrating. The issue is about trusting the people who are forming the budget. And that's where I'm going to say, I trust the process that we have gone through and that we will go through to aim at our strategic points. I did not always trust where we were doing this in years past. So I just commend Olivia and Ryan that we're going to kind of go out on a leap of faith, worse than most. I'm sorry, we might do this every year. Leanne, your experience, we do it, but this year seems to me full of way big unknowns, including what in the world kind of a teaching year will we start with and going on beyond all the budgets. So I just again, it's a real strong vote of trust in our leadership, but also with a real big heavy commitment that says we're going to try to give as much public input time if we have to do cuts or reallocation. So I will be supporting the proposed budget. Thank you.
I guess to my point, Jay, it was, I feel like every year it's a trust vote. Other comments? Catherine.
Sorry, I'm thinking maybe it's time to put a motion on the table. And so I'd like to move that the Corvallis School District budget for 2020-21 in the aggregate amount of $351,877,616 for all funds be approved.
Second.
Discussion? Sarah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna make it before the motion was moved, but I'll make it now. And it was mostly that I will be supporting the budget because it is a trust vote because we have so many unknowns this year. And I think it's a little scarier this year because the unknowns feel really big. We don't even know what school's gonna look like when we open in the fall. But I do feel like the budget aligns very well with the values that the school board has adopted and that drive our decision making and the way our school district runs. And so it's a trust vote for all the unknowns. It's also a trust vote because I believe in the people who've made this budget. I believe in the people who are making the decisions about what next year will look like. And I believe that they will do the best they can with the resources we have next year to stay in alignment with those values. Thank you.
Margaret?
I'm going to vote in favor of the budget but it's, I mean, it's a difficult decision because I completely see the point that Peter is making. Is that the OSBA put us all in sort of put all the budget committees across the state in kind of a quandary by advocating for this essentially fantasy budget that makes more unknowns than there otherwise would have been. But nonetheless, I think this is a difficult year. And I'm going to make the difficult decision to vote in favor of the budget.
Peter.
I guess I would just like to say I am going to oppose the budget, and really I trust the school, I trust the staff, the board, the district. I trust and I respect their work, and I do trust them, and I believe that they will do a very good job. But I believe in process, and I think process and policy are really important in these times. And I'm just looking for more transparency, and I think there could be more transparency to come with the trust. Trust is important, but I think we need the transparency to go with the trust, and it builds trust. And so this is not, it's with respect for the work that you have done to put the budget together, and with understanding for the unknowns, but it really is a nod to just, holding to our values, sticking to our policies, regardless of whatever anyone else is doing, and talking about the hard things when you have to talk about the hard things. Yes, it's uncomfortable to talk about what programs will go away, or possibly what staff might not have positions in the fall, but they also, it's important. We have to deal with it sooner or later, and they might be better for them really than the uncertainty. They can make plans. So I would just, my vote is a respectful no, and it will be just in the hopes that we can do this, if we do it again, with more transparency earlier, even if we're taking a educated guess as to what the revenue is going to be. And I think we can do that. I really think you could do that and make an educated guess as to where those cuts are going to come. Thank you.
Any final comments before we vote? Sarah and Catherine, I think that your hands are still raised, but okay.
I just forgot to put it down. We're good.
That's fine. Okay.
So may I go ahead and comment?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Catherine. Yes.
Sorry. No, I put my hand back up. I am going to vote in favor of the budget. I appreciate the thoughtful questions and comments and the sense of responsibility of the folks on the committee, and just the process that's occurred. And I also appreciate the work that staff has done, both in preparation for the budget, but also in terms of answering our questions and trying to give us as much information as possible. I believe that this budget is consistent with our policy. And I also believe that it's consistent with a strategic plan and with the goals, the board's stated values and goals. I think it's consistent with the policy in the sense that it's based on conservative knowledge and assumptions, and that it's based upon the documented information we have at this time. And I think also that in a lot of ways, it's a status quo budget. So it's really not that different than the current year's budget. And it's the starting place for whatever happens next when we do have firm information. And from what I'm reading, it may be September before the legislature meets. So I think that we just can't expect to move into a new year without an adopted budget with the information we currently have. I appreciated both Ryan and Olivia in terms of the information, the comments that they made about their thoughts on the use of the reserves. One of the things I was looking for was the acknowledgement that this could go on for more than 1 year, and that we need to be careful of how you use our reserves so that we have enough to soften needs in upcoming years as well. And so I'm very appreciative of the process and the thoughtfulness and the budget that we have before us.
Thank you. Lou?
Just for clarification, I believe you all have said this before, Olivia and Ryan, but you already have a bunch of contingency plans in mind, or not a bunch, but you already have contingency plans and scenarios for the likely decreases coming up, right?
Yeah, we have initial plans. We are still in the process of developing them. And we'll be doing that all the way up to whenever that session happens. Yeah, so we're in process right now and communicating with our building leaders.
Okay, thanks for the clarification because I got confused for a second, but I was pretty sure that's what you all said. I feel like that's the best that you all can do at this point, is to have like going through a couple different exercises without even knowing what the percentage is actually going to be, and going in advocating the strongest that you all can for the kids in the district with the budget ask as it is without any cuts in it, I think is also a way of advocating through a budget, and not doing initial cuts without the cuts being asked for. Because I know early at our last meeting, I asked about like, has there even been proposed cuts yet? And there hadn't been. So that's what I was basing that comment on too. So thank you.
Therese?
So I appreciate the perspective around the challenge of what to do with the many unknowns and wanting to make sure that our budget process is as transparent as it can be in a budget scenario that I'm imagining most of us have not seen quite like this. I mean, we had uncertainty before, but I'm not sure that we've had uncertainty on the public health front, uncertainty in an election year, uncertainty in terms of our funding. Like there's so many moving parts right now that it feels even extreme for what we have ever potentially experienced in terms of uncertainty in the past. So with that in mind, I just want to say that I will support this budget. I do support this budget. I think that to echo Lou's comment, it's not our place to preemptively offer reductions and give the state the message that we can get by with less. We can't get by with less. And if we have to take reductions, it will come at a cost, absolutely. And that cost will only be transparent if we leave our budget as intact as we can until such time as reductions are requested. I think it will be much more powerful message if the message that we can send is, you wanted reductions and we had to go through, and in our line item, we had to eliminate our counselors, we had to eliminate our librarian, or whatever decision ends up being made, as opposed to the approach of saying, well, in anticipation of you taking away money, we think these things are probably less important, so we're going to plan to not be able to have those, and then yay for us if we get to. I think we have historically been asked, communities have been asked to problem solve budget shortfalls themselves. And this is our opportunity to send a message that this is not enough money, but this is the amount of money that we have had to work with, and we're going to work with it until somebody tells us that we can't have that amount of money anymore. And so I appreciate that message. I really do hear the agony of, well, what is this going to mean if and when that time comes that we have to make changes? Won't we have then just had to do all of this work again? And perhaps there will be some rework and reimagining. Maybe not rework, but reimagining of what to do in that situation. But I think that's the responsibility of the school administrators. And it's as a parent of a child in the district, I far prefer that you go back and do the work to reimagine when you actually have less to work with, than that you come into the situation, or you start the conversation saying, I'm willing to work with less. I feel like that you're going to be better able to advocate for my child's needs if you're coming, with that stated need up front, which is already a not fully, it's not a fully met need in the first place. So I do support the budget. I really feel like the policy, I do think we're adhering to our policy. The process piece, I think that the onus is on the district now. It's on the district staff to figure out how they're going to involve the community in a meaningful way when the time comes that they have to make changes to the budget. And so that's your charge. I vote for the budget. And I also am saying, be ready to meaningfully engage our community in a way that makes it clear to them that they still have a voice, even though we had to follow the procedure and guidelines of public meeting law. We had to follow guidelines around setting tax rates, and we need to do all of that stuff. So we're going to do it. And when the information comes later, now the district leadership will take responsibility, and they'll make sure that there's a way for the community to meaningfully engage in that conversation. And I'm confident that you can do it, or I would maybe be more hesitant to vote for the budget. But I know that you can, so I'm going to support it.
Last call for anybody to discuss. Catherine. Catherine, you're still on mute.
Sorry, sorry. So I left out one thing in my comments that I wanted to add, and that was that I appreciated Sammy's response to the request tonight for the additional $50,000. In terms of, I think it fits into one of the stated priorities of this budget and of the district, but I think it needs more conversation in terms of these are what our stated programs are and priorities, and this is what we're already working on. And does this fit as a higher priority, or is what we're doing now, which will take us in these same kind of areas where we want to leave our priorities? And I think also just what's involved in that proposal needs to be vetted more. So to me, it feels like a board decision after an adopted budget is in place in terms of how to use those equity dollars to the most effective way for the staff and board decision. So that's all. Thanks.
With that, I'm going to close the discussion. I think this is what I'm supposed to do, and call for a vote. I don't know how official this needs to be. Maybe we need to do our reaction. Yes, Sammy, tell me.
So it's you have all possibilities of ways to collect votes, but I would recommend going with roll call vote. So you call on people's names and they will say aye or nay.
Okay. All right. So everybody's jumping around here. Sammy.
Aye.
Jay. Jay.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Aye. Aye.
Therese.
Aye.
Tina.
Aye.
Andrew.
Aye.
Catherine.
Aye.
Margaret.
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Bill.
Aye.
Lou.
Aye.
Peter.
Nay.
Who am I forgetting? If I've forgotten, you raise your hand. Oh, Vince.
I vote aye.
Who else? You all shift around really fast. I should have just used my screen. Okay, next time. All right.
There's one more left, Leanne. You forgot about her. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's you.
Oh, aye. Sorry, I'm like, who did I forget?
So would you like Jennifer to announce the tally?
Yes.
Okay, so we have one nay and One member is unavailable, not here with us tonight. And so we have 12 remaining yays. So the yeses have it, motion passes.
Okay. We're now moving on to tax rate. Do I hear a motion?
So hi, this is Vince, unless Andrew is going to make the motion, in which I will defer.
Sure, I'll do it. I move that the permanent tax rate of $4.4614 per $1,000 of assessed value be levied for operating purposes, that a local option tax rate of $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value be levied in support of the general fund, and that a tax amount of $13,079,018 be levied for the service of bonded debt obligations.
Do I hear a second?
Second, this is Jay.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to just call for the vote. So aye or nay? Bill?
Aye.
Vince?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Peter?
Abstain.
Sarah?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
Sammy?
Aye.
Margaret?
Aye.
Lou?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Therese?
Aye.
And I will vote aye. Leanne, aye. So I believe that passes.
Yes, once again, there are, sorry, Sammy, there are 12 yeses and 1 abstain. So, yeah.
Okay, we now move on to adopting our minutes from May 14th. I had those in front of me at one time. Do
I move that we adopt the minutes from our May 14th meeting.
Second.
Thank you. Do I need to go through again? Yes? Is that the official way?
You could actually call for a roll call, and then if you're not sure about the conclusion, call for a voice call, and if you're not sure about the votes, then go for a roll call.
Okay, I'll go for a voice call. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those against say nay. Okay. Looks like we passed those adopted minutes. And I think that that's it. I think that we're ready to adjourn. Oh, Ryan. And Vince and Olivia. Okay, hold on. We aren't ready yet.
So close. I just wanted to say thank you to our board and our budget committee for working alongside us this year in such challenging times to put together a budget that aligns with our priorities. And specifically to Leanne, I know that this is your first time to chair this committee and to do it from home with a little guidance and trying to read everybody's minds. You did a fantastic job. So thank you for stepping up and taking on that role. That was really, really important. And you did a fantastic job under any circumstances, but specifically under these. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Vince.
So Ryan stole my thunder. You'll remember that I nominated you to be chair, and because I knew you would do so brilliantly. Thank you so much for serving in that role.
Thank you. All right, last comments before we all go find our pillow. Okay, this meeting is adjourned. See everybody at another meeting.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Leanne. Good night, everybody.
Bye.